For nearly 1500 years, England had been a Catholic country. Henry destroyed that over his simple desire for a pretty young girl and a male heir to succeed him. What became known as the dissolution of the monasteries followed, with the destruction of 800 large religious buildings. Monasteries like Whitby Abbey in the north of England had grown very rich and powerful over the centuries. In 1540, they lost everything. Where monks resisted this desecration, they were often cruelly put to death, as a gruesome reminder to others not to resist the king. The king's defiance of the Pope created waves across Catholic Europe. France and Spain, supported by Rome, threatened to force England back into the bosom of the true faith. Fearing an invasion, Henry VIII began a building program to strengthen coastal defences. On the island of Lindisfarne, off the coast of Northumberland, the stones from a nearby ruined abbey went to build a new style of castle on a rocky crag. The castle, now converted into a house, is more of a small military fort. And one of the reasons for this change was the development of artillery, which meant the end of the old-style fortresses like Bamburgh Castle. Its sheer size made it an easy target for cannon fire. It meant a new design of castle was needed. These would be low-lying, more compact, and as a result difficult to see and hit. Henry built 20 of them along the south coast, facing France along the English Channel. Deal Castle is a superb example. These forts used powerful new cannon to destroy an enemy before they landed on the beach. They also had the ability to defend an attack from land. The design is in the shape of two clover leaves, one larger than the other. This pattern creates 145 openings for cannon and firearms. This was a castle built purely for defence and not for living in. In fact, the castle was so efficient that it took only one officer and 24 soldiers to run it. Two more Tudor castles that still survive were built to protect Falmouth Harbour in the southwest of the country, which was an important Tudor naval port. St Maur's Castle on the east side and Pendennis Castle on the west. They were both capable of blowing an enemy ship out of the water if it tried to enter the harbour. All along the south coast there are examples of these impressive forts. Henry VIII's reign also marked the birth of English naval power. In 1540, he built the first naval dock in Britain at Portsmouth, and it's been home to the Royal Navy ever since. Its Tudor heritage can still be seen in the fortresses that guarded these waters. Southsea Castle is situated on a headland outside the harbour entrance, as this was a perfect position to protect the harbour from any invading ships. The River Thames was also a key location for shipbuilding. Given Henry's fascination and love of warships, he'd frequently visit the dockyards not far from his favourite palace at Greenwich. The Tudor palace was demolished in the 17th century. The old Royal Naval College now stands on the site that was originally the birthplace of both Henry and his daughter Elizabeth. In 1558, Elizabeth I became Queen of England. She'd dominate the age and become one of England's most successful and loved monarchs. But as a Protestant, Elizabeth, like her father Henry VIII, became the enemy of Catholic Europe, which included elements of Scotland. These rare Tudor fortifications near the border at Berwick-upon-Tweed show how determined Queen Elizabeth was to prevent a possible Scottish invasion. The threat came from Elizabeth's cousin, who lived here at Holyrood Palace in Edinburgh in Scotland. She was Mary Queen of Scots and stood to succeed to the English throne should Elizabeth die childless. As a Catholic, Mary considered herself the rightful Queen of England, and as a result, she and Elizabeth became bitter enemies. But it would be Mary whose plight would end in tragedy. Under suspicion of her intention to overthrow Elizabeth, Mary was abducted by Scottish nobles and held in the island castle on Loch Leven. With the help of her jailer's son, who was smitten by her beauty, she was secretly rowed to safety, where she rallied her supporters for one last battle. She lost, and fled across the border to England, hoping for mercy from her cousin and bitter rival, Elizabeth. She was to be disappointed, and over the next 18 years was held prisoner in a succession of northern castles, including Bolton in Northumberland, where she lived for a year while her fate was being decided. Finally, after accusations of plots against Elizabeth, she was put on trial and executed. It's said that when Mary's executioner asked for forgiveness, she replied, "I forgive you with all my heart, for now I hope you shall make an end to all my troubles." With her throne secure, Elizabeth's power and prestige grew, but curiously, she was also noted for her careful spending. The Queen built no palaces for herself. Instead, eminent households like Ingatstone in Essex and Burghley in Cambridgeshire would be granted the honour of inviting the Queen and her massive entourage. Lavish entertainment was always expected, and the costs were vast. But many nobles begged off the pleasure of her stay for fear of bankruptcy. Others saw it as an opportunity to boost their social status and built grand houses specifically for the occasion. Like Kirby Hall, largely designed to entice the Queen, but after spending a fortune on expensive glass and fine gardens, she never came. Today, Kirby Hall lies in ruins. The family simply couldn't maintain the upkeep and eventually lost their wealth to gambling, and the house was left to rot. It's since become an historic site, and the formal garden has been restored. For Elizabeth, the threat of an invasion from Europe continued to loom large on the horizon. The Spanish king saw the Protestant Elizabeth as a heretic, and with the Pope's blessing, an armada of 130 ships set sail from Spain for England in the summer of 1588. When the fleet was first sighted off St. Michael's Mount in Cornwall, a fire was lit on the church roof to signal an invasion. Visible for miles, a rapid succession of similar beacons were lit, alerting not only the naval bases, but also Elizabeth in London, that England was about to be attacked. The response was swift and decisive, and proved disastrous for the slow and cumbersome Spanish armada, which was no match for the small and manoeuvrable English ships. Moreover, a vicious storm drove the Spanish into the dangerous waters of the Pentland Firth in Scotland, where looming cliffs and rocks awaited them. It's thought that up to 20,000 Spanish sailors and soldiers died, and the failed invasion has gone down in history as one of the worst ever naval disasters. However, it was a celebrated victory for Elizabeth and one that defined England as one of the most powerful nations of the Tudor age. When the Queen died in 1603, the age of the absolute rule of the monarch died with her, because a new power was emerging in London that rejected the King or Queen's divine right to rule. This is the Palace of Westminster. Just as it is today, it was in the 17th century the seat of Parliament. It was their role to pass laws and raise taxes for the monarch